My guest is Avner Mandelman. He's the author of a novel called The Deba. Very fast-moving, interesting novel. But we're not going to talk about this today. We're going to talk about you. Avner, I assume you served in the IDF?
Yes, I did.
Did you also serve in the Secret Service at all?
No, I did not.
So why is your attraction to these kinds of special forces or Secret Service?
Because it's quite useful for an author to talk about characters who do what they don't want to do. You want to put the character in a situation in which there's one thing he will never ever do because it's terrible and horrible and immoral. And that's the kind of thing that his mother, father, the motherland, the fatherland demands of him. And the ones on whom you put the biggest demand are the George Smiley types. These are the agents who must do the necessary evil that let us all keep our conscience pure. And from the beginning, I used to write stories. It was about secret agents with angst. They seem to be the most productive for me.
Well, is that because you were a kind of kid who, fantasizes about that? I mean, because I remember fantasizing as a 20-year-old. I haven't done it for years, and I'm too old for that. No. But if I remember those fantasies, it was about being killed or murdered in mysterious ways or doing crazy things like that. Did you as a kid?
No, I used to fly model airplanes. I played the violin, and I had friends, and I played other games, but I'd never fantasized about anything. I was in the Army, in the Air Force. And
were you a pilot? Or?
I didn't fly because I'm too tall to fly, but I used to fly privately later on. But I was in the anti-aircraft Hawk missile battery. I was in the Six-Day War, as was my brother. And when it was finished, I got a degree in aeronautical engineering and went to France to do my engineering stage, my apprenticeship, and then came to Canada.
Why did you choose Canada?
Because it's midway between Europe and the US. It's lovely. They speak English, they speak French, and it's not as fast-moving in the US, but not as lethargic as Europe. And when I came here, I saw I made the right choice.
But why did you leave Israel? I mean, was it opportunity, or was it you wanted to get away from the conflict, or what was it?
All of the above. The conflict is something which is harrowing, and I wanted to have my kids have their own choice whether to be in there or not. I didn't want to put them there willy-nilly. But I also want to be in a different place. I mean, Israel is nice, but beyond a certain point, it is small. And you go outside, and it's larger. And yet, I keep going there, and I have friends there, and I keep visiting, and my family is there. And all my stories up to now and books have been set in Israel.
And your kids go back to Israel, and did they serve in the army at all?
They don't serve in the army. No. They're Canadian. They were born in North America, and they speak English. Well, I speak a little bit of a Hebrew. They've done the bar mitzvah. But they love it in Israel, but they are Canadian. They're good Canadian kids, both in university now. They have friends here. Their roots are here, but the family is in Israel.
And your wife is Canadian-born or Israeli-born?
Ex-wife, Israel. Now I have a girlfriend.
Oh, I see.
And I'm Canadian, too.
So, as a sense, because the novel's about an identity crisis and all kinds of levels, did you, I mean, quite a sense, you don't put yourself in the novel, and it is a novel, it's an art of creation, but in that sense, did you experience lots about identity crisis that informs the novel?
Not to that extent. Every writer uses real life as a model. Picasso uses the apple as a model, but anything between the real apple and the painting is past. When Nabokov wrote about Lolita, he's not a pedophile. He wrote about a pedophile and so on. A writer writes a book. It's a marionette. The puppeteer is not his marionette. You are using the nose of Aunt Gertrude and the legs of Aunt Mabel and the character of father sometime, or you are taking bits and pieces from real life and you put them artistically together, and inevitably you also put a piece of yourself. But most people who think that the writer in effect writes to show a certain point of view, they don't know how what I call real artists work. The people who are polemicists, who try to promote a point of view, they try to prove themselves right, and usually the book falls flat because you can see the writer saw that something else is more important than the art. For a real writer, art is above everything else. And he will write books that will basically myth his family and friends and relations just to make the book right, which means the book is not a fodder for something more exalted, but everything else is fodder for the book. So I'm sure I took pieces of my own life and my family and friends and enemies to put in the book, but it's just raw material.
Yeah, but it's not so much that I'm asking about, data or that kind of thing, but the struggles. Because there's an identity struggle that's part of the revelation of the whole ending.
Yes.
There's the identity of the transformation of the Deba. There's all kinds of, even all the characters, you think they're one way and they become something else.
Yes.
As the movie, as the book, I'm already projecting as a movie, as the book progresses. Now, these sense of identity struggles, you have to go, everybody goes through them.
You have to go through it.
And so it's to what extent did your own struggles get thrust into the book in some way?
I never even thought about it, because every time that I write a book, I have to let it flow through me. I have really to feel the book. So I have to write something against my own grain. If I think something is right, I'll try to prove it wrong, and vice versa. And I have to make myself vibrate. If it's identity, I'll go to vibrate with identity difficulties. If it's something else, I'll vibrate with that. You have to suffer the book in earnest. You cannot fake it. And then the writing itself becomes a reporting of real suffering in real time. So if the book is about identity, I'll have to find the little nuggets inside that are identity suffering and write about them and magnify them. But the book is not about anything in that regard. The identity and the sufferings are, in effect, they are part of the book. It's one of the raw materials. I'm sure there are a lot of things inside me that came into the book, but the book is the important part, not the important thing, not things inside me. I'm not the important part.
But let's take another aspect, the aspect that I say is the background, which is the politics and the Arab-Israeli conflict, that's a critical background part for the book. Your own involvement in politics, I get a sense you're not involved in politics, is that right?
I'm not involved at all. My way of involved in the world is in my business, in the market, and in writing. I also have a column in a newspaper. I have many friends, but I'm not in any organized party. It's not my involvement. My way of doing something is to write.
But you have views of the
Of course I have views.
And I want to talk to you about those views.
The views are not usually conventional, because what's really happening in Israel is not something you find about in the press. The New York Times has on a masthead all the news fit to print. As somebody who's both a writer and an investor, I want the news unfit for print. I want the unrepeatable, the unprintable, the unspeakable, because nobody else will say it. And in Israel and Middle East, in effect, peace is already there. If you want a car stolen from Tel Aviv and they leave it to somebody in Ramallah, somebody will do it on order and they'll divide the loot. There is real honor among the thieves on both sides. The top of both sides also do business together. The Jericho Casino was owned by the Sharon family, allegedly, and by part around Arafat, and they divided the loot. So at the top and at the bottom, there's already peace, and they already make money. The only people who suffer are the ones in the middle. But that has always been the case. So peace, in effect, is going to minimize the number of those in the middle who suffer. But the Middle East already is doing business with each other. Saudi Arabia imports Israeli braziers with labels saying made in Cyprus. Not half, probably all, or almost all, of the soccer stadiums in the Arab countries are drip irrigated by equipment made in Israel. They already are living together. They're already doing business together. But what you see in the papers is not what's really happening. It's a different kind of environment. And so I have my own views, but they are colored by physical facts rather than just by printed matter. It's not something that is useful for anybody who does politics, because it's not the kind of thing you can talk about. But it has nothing to do with the book.
Well, in some sense it does, because one of the themes in the book is that what appears isn't what it really is.
This is true.
There's a connection there.
This is true. I basically go back to sources. And also in my business, in investments, it's very similar to writing, because you have to overcome preconceived notions, and you have to look at what nobody wants to look at, and you have to look at stuff you don't even want to go into, because there the profit may lie. And in literature also, if you believe something fervently, prove it wrong. Because what's a belief? What's more important, your belief or the book? If you're a writer, the answer is the book. But it's not always easy, and if you vibrate, then it transmits to the paper.
With that, we're going to end. Thank you very much, Avner. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you.